trail paths, shingle, sandy beaches. As ultra runners, we will get to experience that kind of terrain. But what is it like when you're chasing the sunrise? Hello and welcome to the Ultra Running Podcast with me, Coach Marshy. So as ultra runners, we do get to experience all sorts of terrains, and we will inevitably experience some things that are perhaps a little out of the ordinary. And I think today we might get to cover some of that as well. So we're going to bring in today's guest. So welcome to Ian. Hello, Ian. How are you?
I'm very good. Thank you. How are you, Neil?
Yeah, very good. Thank you. So let's start off with, who are you? What do you do, and what's your kind of involvement within running?
So my name's Ian Storer. As background, I am a scientist and actually a chemist by training, and I work within scientific research at the moment. And my involvement in running is I ran a lot as a teenager, and I really enjoyed running, but I gave it up for many, many years. And I only really started back running again about 5 years ago. And since then, I've kind of gradually got more and more into it. And I train a lot now, and I've kind of gone to longer distances of running. So kind of built up from running a 5K, 10K, half marathon, and then finally now I'm running ultra marathons.
Excellent. So to let the listeners know, Ian and I know each other very well. We've shared many a race experience together, whether that be me as a crew member or in races together. And Ian is part of our running club, High Runners. So anyone who's listened to the show regularly would have listened to sort of Andrew and Jan and Helen, who have been on the show also from the club. So sort of just tell us some experiences so far, Ian, of your kind of ultra running experiences. Sort of when it started, what was your first ultra marathon?
Yeah, so the first ultra marathon was probably around 2019, I think it was. It was maybe slightly before 2018. It was the Grim Reaper ultra marathon. That was the first one I did, and I wasn't actually supposed to be running that ultra. And I think it was actually with yourself, Neil. I actually swapped places at the last minute and decided to do a 40-mile ultra, even though I was actually down to run with people in a relay originally. So I took on that 40-mile ultra literally, I think, like a week before. I just decided to do it, and actually, I really enjoyed the experience actually, because I happened to win that particular one as well. So I guess straight away I had a positive experience of ultra running, and it really kind of hooked me from there.
Yeah, so I think if I recall it, I think you were in a team of, you were the fourth person of a team, and I was meant to be doing a solo race at that event. And I think what we did was swap the entry fees over as you did me and I did you, and I was part of the team, and we also won that team event. And then you went and won the 40-mile race. So yeah, no, I remember it well. So from that point onwards, then obviously 2019, I appreciate there's been the pandemic and there hasn't been as many races, but since 2019, have you sort of moved on with ultras and it sort of become a bit more of a thing in your life?
Yeah, I mean, completely. I guess it wasn't completely planned the way it happened, but I started to run ultras more, and I booked to do some in 2020. But because of the pandemic, everything got shifted into 2021. So really, 2021 was the year for me of ultra running. So I ended up running 4 ultras, one each month at the end of 2021. So I'd say last year was where I really kind of honed the ultra experience and got a lot more, I guess, kind of knowledge and understanding of basically how I find ultras and how I have adapted to them.
So what I'm going to do is a little bit out of the ordinary for this podcast. Is I'm going to tell the listeners a story about an ultra race with you and I. So Ian's been a member at my gym for a while, and there was a bit of a joke that caught Ian and I out about shepherd's pie and cottage pie. And basically we were having a bit of a joke with a few of the guys in the room, and we we're talking about what the ingredients were. And we came out with the word carrots, and we said carrots are kind of in one and not in the other. Of course, it was a bit of a joke. But anyway, this sort of then carried on. And in July, was it, Ian? I think in 21. No, that was actually in 20, wasn't it?
In 20, I think. It was about July time. Yeah.
July time in 20, we went and did the Lady Bower. Oh no, sorry, September it was. September in 2020. We managed to get a race in that was going ahead, and I was on the 35-mile race and Ian was on the 50-mile race, and it was a lapped race, and we were about a mile out from the end. the end for me being 35 miles, and Ian had managed to go all the way around this 15-mile loop again, and it caught me up and it was right on my tail, but I didn't know he was there. And the reason I knew he was there was because he asked me from a distance. He just shouted out at the end of this ultra, "What's the difference between shepherds and cottage pie?" And it was a really funny moment for us. And of course, it was one of those where he had to be there, but it just sort of summed up Ian's personality and my personality, that, you know, although we like to be serious and be competitive in our runs, there's always going to be that fun element, right, Ian?
Definitely. I think particularly with ultra running, that's why I really enjoyed it, because I think just the atmosphere is one of fun, one of support as well. You know, it's less competitive, and I actually prefer it to running a lot of the shorter distances where it's, you know, a lot more about competing. It's a lot more about fun at ultra distance.
Yeah. So you talk about 21 being a one ultra per month, sort of in those last few months of the year. So what was the first one that year?
First one was the UTS 50, which I did. So that was a 50k over Snowdonia, and yeah, that was a lot of climbing in that one. I think it's about 11,000 feet of climbing. So coming from Cambridge, I guess you don't really train too much for the climbing. So that was the hardest part. I mean, certainly the next day walking was a struggle. I'll put it like that.
Yeah. So that was obviously involving Snowdon, right?
Yeah, so we didn't actually summit Snowdon on that particular one, but all around Snowdonia. So we're obviously just, you know, one mountain over from there.
Right. Okay. And like you said, you kind of walked out of that one a little bit stiff and sore the next day.
Yeah.
And then which month was that then, in 21?
Oh gosh, now you're asking the questions. So I think that one was September. Yeah, that was September, that one.
So then you went on to the next one, which was?
The next one was October, and that was lakes in a day. So we're taking it to the next level again after that. So yeah, so that was 50. I think it ended up, according to the watch, being 53 miles. So quite a bit further. And I think it was a little bit more climbing. I think that was about 12 or 13,000 feet of climbing.
So lakes in a day will be something that people that are familiar with the ultra world will have potentially heard of. So yes, when you're sort of running through the Lake District, the way I understand it, in the first 10k of that, you've ended up going knee deep in water, right?
Oh, absolutely. So I think it's about 6 miles in, so about 10k in, you actually have a river crossing in that one. So, and the water was, I think it's definitely over knee deep at that point. So there's nothing you can do to stop getting completely wet feet. I mean, I was wearing waterproof socks, but they ended up being more like bags holding the water in, to be honest with you, at that point. So yeah, so you definitely soaked from the outset.
So how did you deal with the next sort of, you know, 38 miles or so, you know, 30, 40 miles beyond that? You know, if you say 53 miles, how do you deal with that with wet feet? You know, psychologically, what does that do to you in that moment?
So I must admit, I was more concerned that there'd be more problem than there actually was with the wet feet. Actually, that wasn't too much of a problem. I think if as long as you prepare well, and I always put a lot of Vaseline on my feet, etc., the usual tips and tricks, and it makes a huge difference. And also, when you're wearing high quality multi-ply socks, it means that your feet don't tend to get the blisters. So I didn't have any problems with blisters at all. So actually, the water was less of an issue, if I'm honest with you, than I expected. Probably the hardest thing actually was because of the way the socks act. They actually tend to ride up on your feet and stick to your feet. So I ended up with the toes getting a bit crushed. So I had to kind of stop at the next chance to stop after coming downhill and actually sort of move the socks around quite a bit. But on the whole, it wasn't too bad in the end.
So if that wasn't a big issue, were there any big issues on lakes on the day?
So for me, I mean, obviously it was super hard because it was a lot of climbing, and all the climbing was near the beginning. So that was one that was a predictable thing. But again, when you're actually faced with it, it is really hard. And I think the other bit there is the fact that when you're climbing, you're not really thinking about eating. So
Yeah.
I mean, I ran foul of, even though I knew, and I, you know, used to do running ultras, kind of knew in my mind was you have to fuel, and you have to fuel early, and I did not fuel sufficiently. So after the first stop, so that was 12 miles in, I was eating at that point, but the food I was taking on board hadn't had time to digest, and I wasn't really feeling the effects of it. So on the next climb out of that village, out to Threlkeld, it was another really tough climb up Clough Head. That I was really suffering during that. I mean, almost to the point where I actually started to cross my mind, I might not be able to finish this one, but it's just amazing that it was all about the nutrition, all about the food and nutrition. I'd messed up a bit, but it wasn't irreparable. So what I'd eaten then gradually filtered through my system, and I got a second wind after that. So the advice I can give to people is, especially when you're on climbs, don't forget to eat. You know, especially when you're climbing as well, and you've got your head down and it's hard work, you must eat.
Yeah, no, I think we just recently at the running show They had Renee McGregor on, and she was talking about nutrition and ultras, and she was saying that people forget in that first 20 miles, they forget to refuel early, and I think that is a common mistake. So, and no matter how many ultras you do, I think given any day that could happen, right?
Absolutely. I mean, you don't feel hungry. That's the thing. In fact, eating's the last thing you're thinking about doing when you're climbing the hill, but you have to discipline yourself. You have to remember, and you have to think really carefully about what it is you do eat so you have enough energy. Because obviously you're expending so much energy in those climbs.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So the next two ultras I'm very familiar with, because basically I've recce'd one of them a couple of times personally myself, the Loop, and I've kind of crewed you on both of them. So
Yes.
Wendover Woods 50, the Centurion Wendover Woods 50. Now, this is just south of London, sort of is it the Chiltern Hills? I think it is, sort of around that area. And it's quite a flat area apart from Wendover Woods itself. So I'll let you take the floor and tell us a little bit about the Wendover Woods 50.
Again, another amazing event. I must admit, I thought of the 4 I was going to do on paper. They sounded like it was going to be probably the most straightforward. Actually, it was far from that. It was really hard. I'll be honest with you. Everyone says it's hard, but on paper, it didn't sound as bad. Tremendous amount of climbing still. So again, it was comparable amount of climbing to the UTS 50 in the Lakes in a Day. So I think it was about 12,000 feet of climbing, but that was distributed over 5 laps. So again, it wasn't that you could condense all the climbing at the beginning and know that towards the end you had a flatter run, which was the case with the previous 2 events I've talked about. And with this one, it was distributed over the whole of the event. So again, you got no rest later on. Also, mentally, it was incredibly challenging. I think of all of them, not being point to point and doing laps was really hard because you're going through this, you know exactly what's coming next. And also you go right past your car each lap as well. So it's super tempting when you see your car there that you can just stop and think, well, I could technically just drive home now. So I think mentally that was the hardest one of all of them. But again, it was a brilliant event. And I'd say of all of them as well, it had, probably the most, you met the most people on that one as well, because everyone was condensed into this quite small course. So it wasn't like we ended up being spread out. So you were lapping people were lapping you, and it had a great kind of spirit to it.
Yeah, I think my perspective of the day, and this is just me, the way I got the information, and it might not be exactly what happened, but I remember getting there nice and early, talking to you guys before the race. Andrew was with us as well, who has been on a previous episode, and we were getting amongst it with the other runners, and we were chatting to some of the bad boy runners, some of the Centurion regulars, and oh yeah, guys, you don't need poles on this. You don't need poles. You're used to doing, you've done UTS and whatever. You won't need the poles. What happened after lap 1?
Well, I could go into that a bit more, actually, stepping back, because we've seen a lot of people who said you don't need poles. But what was interesting is there's quite a strong correlation between those that said they didn't use poles and had done it before, but had never completed it. So there's one person speaking to, I think it was on their 3rd attempt, and said they not managed to complete it before. And I think that probably says it all. This was a run that is really hard without poles. So after the first lap, just going back to your point there, myself and many others were running to their cars to go and get their poles out. I think we all realised it was really hard. I mean, the hills are so steep and they're really slippy as well. So it was super useful for poles, even if you're not a poles regular. It was one where I say more than all the others, you really benefited from using them.
Yeah, I think James and the guys at Centurion have got a really good race there, and actually very specific training for some of the bigger things as well. I mean, in its own right, it's a massive race. It's really, really quite difficult. I've recce'd that route. I've done the whole 10-mile lap. I've done 1 lap. It was horrendous, and that was in the middle of summer, in the middle of the day, under the trees, so it wasn't that hot. You guys were running. This is like November time, and you're running, and it was raining and it was wet and it must have been slippy, and some of these inclines are just out of this world. So, you just wouldn't have expected to get that in that environment, right?
No, not at all. And I think, it was really, it was an amazing time of year to run it, almost the perfect weekend to see it, because it was the middle of autumn. So all the leaves had come off the trees. It was almost just like this kind of golden path you were running along all the time. The trouble was the leaves were covering everything underneath, so you couldn't really see what you were treading on. So you were hitting rocks, you were hitting mud. So again, as you're saying, then it's kind of unpredictable. So again, it was quite a challenge. Obviously, you've done lap 1. By the time you came around lap 2, you knew what you're probably going to be faced with at each point. But again, whether knowing helped or not, I think is debatable.
Yeah. So obviously we'll move on from that, and let's go to December 2021. So the Sunrise by Dark Side Running. So the Sunrise itself as a ultra marathon is actually only actually ran 2 years as we record this, because obviously the pandemic missed 2020. So let's go back and rewind before we talk about 2021. And let's just set the scene for everyone, Ian, that in 2019, you and Andrew were heading up to the Norfolk coast to do this brand new inaugural event called the Sunrise, or the Sunrise Half. And I came along to crew and we had a great weekend. It was a great time. So just tell us a little bit about 2019, what the race involved and sort of how it went.
Yeah, so I guess 2019 at that point, again, I'd not quite got the same amount of experience running ultras. So again, was fairly new to doing this. I guess the difference between this one was the concept of running overnight. So that was part of the law for this. And it was the first time they'd ever run this event. So again, it was totally new. There was no kind of prior experience or anything we could look at on the internet that gave us any kind of guide on, what this would be like. Also running on beaches as well was something that was new to me. And I'm not somebody who knows Norfolk very well. So it wasn't like it was an area I knew. So I think that kind of sets the scene for this was really an adventure. So I guess running this, the decision was I'd run with Andrew, and we ran together. So it was a couple of friends running it. We'd help each other navigate and obviously keep each other company as we kind of figured out as we went, how we felt running through the night. So so a real adventure in 2019.
Do you remember how sort of the time it took and how it was? And
yes, so we took it steady, and I think we did it in about 11 hours in the end, I think was the time, if I remember correctly. So there was the added challenge of not just finishing, but also trying to actually beat the sun to actually get to Great Yarmouth Pier before sunrise. We did not manage to achieve that. In fact, very few people did manage to achieve that. And we didn't really set out trying to achieve that. We were just happy to get through and finish. And I guess the big part is actually quite a large section towards the end. We actually ran in daylight, which helped, significantly. And again, that was a real benefit then. So 2019, the memory was it was a lot of fun in the dark, but also towards the end, it was more of a kind of day run as well.
Yeah. So Clay on Sea across to Great Yarmouth, or round to Great Yarmouth, literally following the Norfolk coastal path. So for people that don't know that area, that's about 43 miles, if I'm right. Is that sort of what it came out as on the Garmin?
Yeah, so I can't remember. I think it was maybe 46 or 47 actually in the end. But I'll go with what my Garmin says.
Yeah, we'll go with that. Yeah, so it's got to be right. If it's on Strava, it's got to be right. So
yeah, if it's on Strava, it's always right.
So that was 2019, and we've headed up there. We had a good time, and of course, we all re-enter for 2020, and then that doesn't go ahead. So then we head up in 2021 to the Norfolk coast, and you entered this time, and there was a few more from our running club that sort of came and joined in as well. And let's just ask you the blunt question: what was the end result in 2021
for myself?
Yeah, for you.
So the end result in 2021 for the half sunrise was I won the half sunrise. So a very positive result, and I enjoyed the experience. It was quite a different experience in 2019 though, because I was running on my own for pretty much all the way.
Yeah, so we'll dig into that in a second. So sort of how many hours was it again? I
think it was like 8 hours and 5 minutes or something like that. So it's pretty much 8 hours.
So call it 4 hours quicker, right? At least.
Yeah, about 3 and a bit hours quicker, yeah.
Yeah, 3 and a bit hours quicker. So let's talk about it then. So you've done this race in 2019, and now you're doing it again in 2021. When you stood on that start line of 2021, what did you think? Did you think this was going to be different? Did you think you were going to go for it? Did you think that you would probably go a little bit quicker because of the experience? What were those thoughts that you thought on that start line?
No, it's an interesting one, because I was trying not to put myself, if you want to put it, under pressure. I wasn't really sure whether I'd go for it or not. I actually was quite happy just to kind of run with feel and just enjoy it. So I didn't have any kind of plan to try and set off too quick. If people had gone off quicker than me, then I would have just stayed behind them and just run my own race. And that was the kind of the idea. I guess quietly in my mind, I knew that the kind of winning time from a few years ago was around 8 hours. So I kind of set in my mind to sort of target 8 hours and set my pacing such that I'll probably end up being there or thereabouts around 8 hours. But again, whether I faded from that, I wasn't sure quite how it would go. So that was kind of how I initially set off. But I did also position myself quite near the front, to set the pace, if you like, at the beginning as well, rather than start near the back, which I'd done before, because I knew on those first beaches, if you end up behind everybody, it's quite hard to get to near the front. So I guess in my mind, I was thinking, well, I at least want to give this one a decent shot, even if I didn't want to put myself under the pressure of trying to actually go for it.
Yeah, so we go back to my little intro there as we started this episode, and I'll talk about the shingle there. So tell us a little bit about the first 4 or so miles of that race.
Yeah. So I say, and this is again, as I go through the race, I can obviously compare and contrast to the experience in 2019 as well, because again, there were differences between them, not least the tide seemed somewhat different from what I remember in 2019. So in 2019, the tide was quite far out at the beginning. So we're able to run along that first beach from Clay-on-Sea to Sheringham. And during that period, the tide was quite far out down the beach. So what you could do is you could actually run below the pebbles for some of it and actually get onto a more sort of sandy, hard surface. And it was actually more runnable. This time, there's no chance of that. The sea was right up onto the pebbles. So the first 4 miles was shingle, was basically a shingle bank. So it was super heavy going. And obviously that was not the nicest way maybe to start the race. But I think in this instance, actually, the race was won and lost on that first beach, because it really was, tough going, and it depended which line you took and how much effort you put in on that first beach as to kind of how people started to really kind of map their race out from there.
Yeah, I think my experience looking, I was still at Clay waiting for Andrew, who was doing the full, to come into the aid station there, and myself and Andrew's son Michael, we were looking at the tracker, and you could see the scale of the tracker, and your dot just kept moving further and further away from the rest of the field. And to be honest, you were starting to catch the leader of the full Sunrise as well, who'd obviously passed through that point already. But you could see that you were moving away at quite a rapid speed. Actually, within half an hour, we worked out you were about 1 kilometre ahead. I don't think I ever really pointed that out to you at the time, but you were starting to move ahead quite quickly. And yeah, so okay, so you've done that first bit, and obviously the difference is very clear between 2019 and 21 there. As the race goes on and you move through, I've got to be honest, in 2021, it was quite hard to keep up with you at times, because I couldn't drive around the coastal road quick enough to get to where was logically the next place that I'd done in 2019. So you were obviously moving a lot faster in 21 than you were in 2019.
Yeah, I mean, without a doubt. I mean, as I said, in 2019, I was running with a friend. We were just happy to take it easy. It was a very social event at that time. 2021, made the decision to run solo. And again, like I said, I wasn't setting out to try and, necessarily win the event. I was just setting out to run, and felt I'd done. I wanted to feel that sense of achievement. I put my best attempt out on the day, and I set off with that in mind. So I set off at a pace that I thought would put me in good stead to run around 8 hours. So again, I had no idea what people were running behind me. And I kept looking back and thinking, have I gone wrong here? Because, the lights were just disappearing further and further back. But I thought, well, I felt strong. I thought I'd just keep going at that pace. I didn't feel I was overexerting myself either. But maybe the experience of running on the mountains from the previous few months had really kind of helped to that point, that, I had that confidence, if you like, in my legs, that I knew that even if I exerted myself quite hard, I'd still be able to keep going.
Yeah, I can imagine that really made a difference. And actually, clearly, perhaps knowing the course, did you recognise bits as you got there, or did it kind of all become a bit of a blur?
Yeah. So, I mean, clearly, having done the course before made a huge difference. I knew broadly what was coming up. I also knew the type of terrain I was going to hit. And also, I think the other thing as well, because I knew what was coming up, I'd also got better kit this time for the event. And I think that's the other thing that's really critical for this particular event. If you're running at night, you've got to have a really good head torch. The last time I run with a cheap head torch, ran out of batteries. Even when it was working, it didn't give a particularly good light. and it made a huge difference having a really high quality head torch this time. Also, between 2019 and 2021, I've been introduced to running with poles, and some people hate poles, and you love them or hate them, but I must admit I'm a massive convert now, and I think running on beaches on shale shingle when it's really slippy, you're losing your balance, having poles was massively helpful. So straight from the outside, my poles out, and I think they really helped along the beach. And I actually think that probably actually gave me that extra kilometre advantage was just purely the use of poles.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably not something that you would really get an opportunity to practice where we're from using poles, but would you definitely recommend people giving it a practice before you start using poles?
I mean, I think if you run on sort of undulating ground, that's probably the best place to sort of practice using them if you want to practice. But I think I mean, I think you do probably, you get used to them after a while. So I think, practice using them before going on a race. So I wouldn't go straight into a race using them because you probably won't really know how to use them effectively. But the other recommendation is to get high quality poles as well. So the best ones come with, like, essentially little glove knit things that clip onto the poles, and it makes it so much easier. If you get the cheaper ones that you have to hold in your hands, you end up with blisters, etc. So I think go for quality running poles and do practice a little bit. But I can, at least from my experiences, they make a huge difference. I find them useful on the uphill. They give you a sense of security on the downhill. And if you're on uneven or as I found running in the dark, ground that you can't properly see, they just give you that extra confidence that if you lose your footing, you can kind of catch yourself as well. So I think it's psychological to some extent on the flats, but it really does help.
So between Cromer, for people that know Norfolk Coast, these places will sound familiar. Between, say, Cromer, Overstrand, that area, and Sea Pooling, there was some that we were told in the race brief. There were some bits of cliff that had previously fallen away in the weeks leading up to the event. The erosion on that coastline is pretty dramatic in some places, and this part of the course happened to encounter a bit that had just been lost into the sea very recently. Was it as dramatic as that when you got to those bits, or not really? Were you right on the cliff edge?
Yeah. There's one bit I remember actually, but there were several bits where you were close to the cliff edge. You could see that, but it was fine. But there's one bit where genuinely you were following the trodden path, and then suddenly you realise there's a sort of dark patch coming up ahead, and you realise the actual path just literally went off the edge of the cliff. And there hadn't really been enough time for a new sort of path to forge inland. So suddenly you're realising if you hadn't actually got a decent head torch, you could have ended up quite easy running over the edge of that. So seriously, I think that's, again, the message is have a good head torch, because they're genuinely, you're out and you're responsible for yourself on these runs, and the cliffs are what they are. So as we all know, you do have to run around them. So yeah, there was a bit of fun with that one.
Yeah, no, I think Giles, the race director of Darkside Running, he very much made a point of that in the race brief, and I felt that it was really important, and they got it spot on from a safety point of view, because the experience that I was hearing on the side was that runners, they got to cliff edges where the path had basically run out. So yeah, okay. So
you've got to say Giles and the team did a brilliant job of that one. I mean, it's a really, really super organized race.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that and echo those thoughts. So moving on down the course a little bit then, Sea Pooling. So there's a little town called Sea Pooling, and then the next place you get to after that is a place called Winterton. And that part of the Norfolk coast is extremely well known for seal breeding grounds. And seals, they breed at a rapid rate, and there's quite a lot of them there. We were told about 2,000, they reckoned. So did you have any encounters with any seals?
I certainly did, yeah. So both times actually in 2019 and 2021, although again, coming back to the team who organised, and they organised it so we ran on the path that shouldn't encounter seals. So we ran on the path that was inland, away from the actual beaches, and they purposely rerouted that way to avoid the seals breeding grounds. But inevitably, some of the seals do crawl inland and climb right over the dunes and down to the side. So we didn't see many either time, but probably saw around half a dozen each time running. But I think particularly in 2021, there was a seal with a pup that was actually on the path, right in the middle of the path, actually in a big puddle, and they were essentially sort of wallowing in the puddle. And of course, we're super startled when runners came along. So we had to take it, steady at that point and careful, because I guess you don't know what, you can't predict what wildlife's going to do. And obviously, I didn't want either cause them any harm or scare them unnecessarily. So again, just we're able to stop and kind of go inland and around them a little bit. But yeah, it gives you a fright to tell you that, because you don't see them. So there are more seals as well, where suddenly a seal would bellow at you from the side and you hadn't even spotted it. So you'd be jumping off your skin because it's completely dark. I mean, especially in 2021, I was running on my own, so it wasn't like you're having, companionship where you're running with other people, or maybe someone's just encountered the seal ahead of you and just you kind of know something's going on. Literally, you're going from completely dark paths to suddenly jumping out your skin. And the other one that got me down there was the other wildlife, like birds. At one point, I almost trod on a bird.
Wow.
I mean, literally, I was putting my foot down and suddenly something flew out. So it didn't cause any harm, apart from the fact it almost gave me a heart attack. But
yeah, no, I think ultra running and wildlife is certainly something that that people have to take into account, and perhaps not so much in the UK, but obviously the guys that race over in the States and in Canada and places like that with the bears and the mountain lions and whatever. But, actually a seal can be quite frightening, right, in the wrong situation.
absolutely. I mean, again, like I say, unpredictable, especially when you've got a seal with a pup. Obviously they're going to defend the pup. So I guess it's right. You want to obviously not cause them any distress, but equally you've got to look after yourself as well.
Yeah, I mean, and that part of the coastline is notorious for adders as well in the summer. So obviously this is winter and they'll all be hibernating, so you don't have to deal with those guys as well.
Say, you didn't tell me about that before, did it?
Yeah, no, you ask, you ask anyone who knows the area well, they'll have an adder story or two. So yeah, so moving on the coastline then. So the sea pooling aid station is the indoor aid station, if you like, and then, to my reckoning, there's about 17 miles to go, maybe a bit more than that. Yeah. It becomes a bit sand duney, doesn't it? Very soft sand there. So what's your experience of running on the sand dunes, but not, more as a comparison between the 2 years and that extra experience that you got?
I'm just sort of thinking, I mean, I think running on the sand dunes wasn't too difficult, if I'm honest with you, because it's mostly hard packed. So from a kind of almost underfoot perspective, it wasn't hard. The hardest bit along that section actually is keeping your eye on the path. There's paths everywhere, up and down the dunes, left and right, and actually staying on the path's the hardest thing. And that's where I went wrong in 2021. I actually lost the path. Again, you're trying to follow your watch. And again, another tip for doing these overnight races, obviously you can't see signs very well, even with a good head torch. If you're looking for a little wooden sign hidden behind a tree on a dune, yeah. So having a good watch with map function is on, critical, and then you can start to see if you're wandering off the path and get, correct yourself pretty quickly. So that was where I went wrong in 2021. I missed the path, ended up running off the dunes down into some field in some marshes, and then kind of realizing how far I'd gone off path, but then not sure how to get back on it again without having to retrace steps. So I ended up literally having to, one point, run through essentially a swamp. I had to go waist deep in water through a swamp, scratching all my legs up and stuff, or brambles and things, just to get back on the path. Again, it's my choice. I could have gone back and tried to retrace my steps, but just literally had to make a kind of left turn 90 degrees straight up and find the path again. So for me, the biggest challenge in the dunes was actually staying on the path. I'd say compared to running on the beaches, it was actually easier. So the pebble beach at the beginning was shockingly difficult underfoot, and I'd say the beaches toward the end were also really hard as well.
Yeah, so that was going to be my next sort of question as we come into the final leg of that. From biggest place there is probably like Winterton and Hemsby, that kind of area, to Great Yarmouth itself. Until you reach that well-known concrete promenade at Great Yarmouth, it is literally soft sand, right?
Yes, and then the trick absolutely is to run as close to the waters as you can. Benefit, I think, particularly, I can't remember what the tide was like in 2019, but in 2021, the tide was receding at that point. So again, you could actually run on the wet sand. That is really quite pleasant because you're running in the waters, almost lapping up, and occasionally you have to dart right when the waves are going to actually go over your feet. But you stay as close to the water's edge as you can, and the sand's quite hard packed. But it's still hard because obviously every bit of effort you put in, if you push too hard, of course, the sand moves. So it's that kind of trick of actually trying to tread carefully and run lightly without disturbing the ground too much. But yeah, it's hard running on the soft sand.
Yeah, no, I always remember the race director Giles's comments in both race briefings, 2019 and 21, that it's always good to have a bit of a joke in there if you can. And he did say, as long as you've got the seat on your left, you're doing all right.
Yeah, exactly. You can't go wrong on this race.
So yeah, no, excellent. So, and then you're coming down the promenade, and just to go back to our title there, you know, what's it like chasing the sunrise? The Sunrise Ultra and the Sunrise Half are kind of, the idea is they start at a time where you had a chance to get in before the sunrise the next morning. So you did on this occasion, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it was great to have that feeling of doing that. Also, the feeling of running in the dark the whole way, because first time I did it, of course, like I mentioned, probably the last section from Sea Pauling was mostly in the light. Obviously, it made it a lot more straightforward then, but this time they had the full experience of running the entire way in the dark. But again, super satisfying, because you know there are not many people set the challenge to be hard enough that not many people can actually get there before the sunrise. So it felt like a kind of double achievement in that regard.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and it was quite hard even in a van and with the coast road to actually catch you up, Ian. To be honest, at times. So, but I remember you coming up those little steps onto the promenade. You know where that promenade starts at Great Yarmouth, and it's probably about a mile and a half to go from there. And you probably knew at that point you had the sunrise in your pocket. You were going to get back before that. Did you ever realise how far ahead you really were?
No, because I didn't. I mean, that's the other trick to the ultra running, which is obviously one that everyone says, but honestly, don't spend time stopping. If you stop, you lose so much time. It's better just to try and keep going as much as you possibly can. So I didn't spend any time stopping and trying to check trackers and stuff to sort of work that out. So I had no idea. I had that whole thing where you're running along the cliff tops and occasionally looking back to see if you can see a little light chasing in the distance, but I couldn't most of the time. So I had no real appreciation of whether that was just because I couldn't see a straight line or behind a tree or whatever. So I was running scared the whole way.
And I think between the two races on this occasion for the 2021 event, there was only a few of you that actually beat the sunrise in. Am I right?
Yeah, I don't remember the actual number in the end. I think it was only about 4 or 5 across both events. Yeah, they made it slightly harder this year as well, because I think the way that the Giles and the organisers wanted to have it was that they tried to sort of get the timing of setting the half off to try and just limit the numbers who can get there in time, sorry, before the sunrise. So I think the last time they had around 10 from the half in 2019, and I think this time it was 4. Because they actually set us off, I think, about 10 or 15 minutes later, just to try and just sort of limit the numbers a little bit and make it slightly more challenging. And I think that whole concept of having a challenge within a challenge is really quite a cool concept, because they've made it to the level where you don't have to be an elite runner to obviously get to that, but it is enough of a carrot, going back to your reference before, to encourage those who are maybe the sort of recreational runners can have a challenge to go for that does actually push them. Because I know the ethos of ultra running, which I completely believe in myself, isn't one of competitiveness, but it allows you to compete against something yourself and compete against nature, essentially, in that regard, which is just gives it a nice flavour to the challenge.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And how did it feel to win that particular event? But bearing in mind you've been there before and the experience of 2019, how did it feel to get that victory?
Oh, I mean, it's always really nice to have a victory. I mean, I think, like I said, I wasn't necessarily going for that at the beginning. I just wanted to try and set the time. What I felt really quite chuffed about is the fact I managed to maintain a fairly consistent pace. So I think for me, more the victory was the fact that I'd actually planned the run and executed the run pretty much as I wanted to. So I'd aimed for around 8 hours and I finished around 8 hours. So it kind of gone exactly to plan, which I think was the nicest part of it.
No, excellent. It was certainly great fun to watch. So some quick fire round questions now to kind of finish us off. So when you got into ultra running, was it because you were inspired by something you saw in the media, knew someone else who was doing it, or it was the natural kind of next step? Which would you say kind of describes it best for you?
It was never an ambition of mine. In fact, if you take me about 4 years ago, I would have said I'll never do that. Not interested. What got me into it, I think it was actually probably the running club, actually, to be honest with you, because other people were doing it. Everyone was talking about it. I was gradually doing more distance. And I think it was at that time where it was because I think you were saying you're going to have to not run that 40-mile race that time. And I thought, well, I've got this relay place, the relay position of just doing the one lap for that Grim Reaper. I felt wasn't enough of a challenge for me. And I just thought in the back of my mind, I'll swap. It really was as simple as that. It was the pull of the people in the club, the fact I was going to this event, and I thought, well, everyone else is pushing themselves beyond their limits. I've got to at least push myself a little bit further. So that was really what kind of got me to try it. And then I think once I'd done one, I was hooked. That was it. At that point, I realized I enjoyed it so much. And also, it kind of got me over that mental barrier of thinking, running that kind of distance is going to be impossible. Suddenly, actually, I realized it's just different. Actually, in many ways, I'd say running a marathon fast is much harder than running an ultra. If you run it calmly, obviously, if you run an ultra as fast as you can, that's a different challenge again. But
yeah, no, really interesting to hear your thoughts on that, actually, because it's good to understand why. And I ask that question to every guest, and the variety of answers are huge. But I'd say there's a common underlying factor where people perhaps never really expected it. It just there's always that underlying unexpectedness around the ultra world. So far then, in your ultra experience, what would you say is the worst thing you've ever experienced so far?
Worst thing in an ultra experience?
Yeah.
I think probably it's having to learn the hard way, which I think everyone probably does have to do. That fact is, when you're used to running races where you can go flat out to the limit of your ability, and can sort of wing it, you can't really translate that into ultra running. So you have to get used to the fact that at the beginning you feel like you're running very slowly and within yourself, knowing that actually that's the right thing to do. I got so used to running races where I went out as hard as I could, and I knew if I faded, it didn't matter too much. And I made that mistake with some of the ultras I did run at the beginning. And even that one that I described where I ran it, I did go out really quickly. And the last lap of that Grim Reaper that I talked about wasn't pretty.
Yeah.
I mean, it was also a super hot day. I think it was over 30 degrees that day. And actually, part of the reason why I won it, in fairness, was a lot of the people did actually drop out. So it was purely grit and determination that kept me going, but it was painful. And another one I ran once, which again was a fantastic event, but I got my pacing all wrong, was a Pedder's Way. And again, I did okay. I got over the line in the end, but the pain I had to go through in the last 10 miles was hideous. So I think that the worst thing about it is having to learn those lessons and learn it the hard way. And the only way you can do it is by making some mistakes. But now I can pace much better. I know myself, I know my body, I know how to fuel better. I know the sorts of things that I can take on board as well at what points in the race. So a lot of that's more comfortable now. And also I know how my body feels. So I know each time, I don't want to put people off, but I know you're going to feel rubbish at some point. And I know when that's going to come. So when I start feeling that way, I know I'm going to get through it. So those sort of doubts of I'm not going to be able to do this go away. It's like, well, I'm just going to have to see this next half hour through, and then I'll feel fine again.
Yeah, no, that's really sound advice. Actually, I sit there absorbing that myself as well at this point. So, so in terms of the training for an ultra marathon, how do you find that in a kind of week to week basis around normal life and family life and things like that? How do you find it?
I mean, obviously finding the time is hard. I mean, as probably most people who do ultras, most recreational runners who do ultras do, their training plan really at most is probably a marathon training plan. So they're not really training for ultras. The ultras is something you just have to get through with grit and determination. And I'm exactly like that. So I did train for marathons back in 2018, 2019. And essentially I've just sort of continued that training habit, if you like, that I got into there for doing ultras. The main thing I've done is just wind it back a little bit and become slightly less intense with all the speed work, etc. But I've managed to keep the consistency of running long runs. And I think that's the main thing that I do still do. But how do I fit it all in? That's really difficult. I mean, I have a very intense job, a professional job to do. So again, trying to find the time to run is difficult. So again, it's that commitment to running. So I will get up extra early in the morning to make sure I do my run before the day starts. Try and go running in the evening. So it's just trying to juggle everything and fit it all in. But I guess once you become a runner and you're committed to it, then there's no option of not running.
Yeah.
You fit it in, and consistency is absolutely fundamental to it. So you've got to get out there and you've got to keep running, otherwise your fitness will drop.
I think the point you make there about the consistent long running and keeping yourself at that consistent level is a massive part of it, right? And I think I'd say that's paid dividends for you. Watching you from afar, that from the sides, that's definitely paid dividend, and is one of the key differences, Ian, I think, to you and a few others in the club that are managing to maintain that ultra running level, is your consistency around those longer runs. I think they really are there. So, okay, so quick fire then. Do you have a favourite race so far?
It's got a special place in my heart as the Sunrise, for obvious reasons, because it's got so many aspects to it that I absolutely love. If I have a second favorite, then that would be Lakes in the Day. I really, really enjoy the Lakes in the Day, but for very different reasons. Just epic, climbing, famous mountains, etc. And yeah, that whole thing that actually just a Strava map at the end to show that you just run across the whole of the Lake District, north to south, and you pretty much end up in Morecambe Bay. I mean, it's just phenomenal. And those are things that, it's just wow. So yeah, absolutely love those. But I really, like I say, like the sunrise, because I love the challenge of trying to beat the sun. I love the terrain you're running on, and I also really like the kind of running overnight aspect as well.
Yeah, cool. And then as far as the bucket list goes, have you got a single race, or is there a few that are on the bucket list?
I guess there's a few. I mean, there's so many great races these days, and they're always like got really sort of iconic themes as well. So there's loads I'd love to do. I mean, this year, okay, one I would love to do, which I'm not signed up to do at the moment, is Jurassic Coast Ultra. I don't know why, but the idea of running around the southwest coastline is just phenomenal. I think again, it's really, really challenging. Of course, again, similar to the sunrise, you get the ups and the downs. A lot of climbing to do on that one as well. So that's one I'll probably wait until I've got a little bit more experience again before I take on. The other thing I really want to try and do now is build up to doing multi-day ultras. So that's the next step for me, is to actually go for multi-days, and also possibly even maybe a single day but longer ultra. So I've never run the 100-mile ultra yet. So I guess that's something else to build up to.
Nice. And then if you were going to give sort of 3 top tips to someone looking to get into the ultra running that involves overnight running, so what would your tips be for overnight running?
Obvious one is don't buy a cheap head torch. Buy the best head torch you can afford. It makes a huge difference. It sounds ridiculous, but it makes a huge difference, and it's essential in those ones. It's not like you're just worried that it's going to go dark on you. The whole race is in the dark, so it's actually fundamental to what you do. I guess the other one I'd say for overnight running is planning and prep. So again, you can't see signposts very well, so it's very different to type in the day. If you were to sort of try and rely on old school maps, etc., you're not going to get your map out and read it very well. It's super hard. So planning and prep, recceing the route if necessary. And then the other one is obviously the kit as well. I mean, I'd say having a watch with maps for me was fundamental to it. Again, you can put your GPX file in these days, and you can check whether you're on course or not. And even the second time of running that overnight race, there were times where naturally I would have missed the route if I hadn't been from a watch just flagging it. So, times we had to sort of notice to go down an alleyway between 2 houses, that type of thing, where it's not intuitive and it's not easy to see. And then the third one, I think, is diet. I think, again, your body isn't used to eating overnight, but you can't run an ultra without eating. So it's hard to know what your body will allow you to eat overnight as well. And that's, I think, something I learned from both of those runs, is your body really doesn't want food anyway when you're doing ultras. And when you're trying to do it at 3 a.m, your body even less keen to eat what you're thinking you should eat. So the way I handle that is basically take a whole range of food, and then you just have to basically see what you can manage at the time. I'll be honest with you, with the overnight sunrise this year, I just did the whole thing on gels, which isn't normally advisable for that sort of thing. But for me, up to 50 miles, I can manage on gels, and it's the only thing I could take. I didn't fancy anything, including the gels, but I could literally just like squeeze them into my mouth, gulp them down, and just get on with it. Whereas cultivating a sandwich or something, or pile of crisps or whatever in the middle of the night, just didn't appeal at all.
Yeah, no, great advice there, Ian. Great points that are very tangible and very easily applied, hopefully, and people can listen and take that forward. So thanks very much, Ian, for coming on the show. I'm personally going to look forward to following the continuation of this journey, and if I can get myself back to a level, very much hope to come on the journey with you. Definitely. So perhaps we'll bring you back on in a year or two's time and have a chat about where you've gone since this episode. But thanks very much for coming on. I hope you enjoyed it.
I did, and thank you very much for having me. It's been brilliant. Thank you.
No, excellent. So guys, I hope you enjoyed the show, and if you did and you think it's useful to someone if you could share it and pass it on to anyone, and please do share that link and give us a rating on Apple and Spotify and whatever platform it is that you use. If you could leave a written review, that would be much appreciated as well. And I hope you enjoyed yourself, and I hope we can meet here again to talk more on the Ultra Running Podcast with me, Coach Marshy.